need to read the skill file and check the uploaded names list before writing. The names to avoid are already in context. Let me write the story now. The envelope was sitting on my kitchen counter when I got home from the city. Plain white, the kind you pick up at Staples in a pack of 50. My son had left it there sometime that afternoon, along with a note that just said, "Open when you have a minute, Dad." I poured myself 2 fingers of rye, lot no 40, the bottle I keep for evenings when I actually want to taste something, and sat down at the table. I wasn't in a hurry. I'd been in a hurry for 40 years, building the business, and I'd promised myself when I turned 62 that I was done with rushing. Inside the envelope was a single folded piece of paper. My son's handwriting, which has always looked like a doctor's. 7 words. "Dad, I don't think I can do this." The wedding was in 11 days. I should tell you about my son first, because none of this makes sense without knowing who he is. He's 34. Works in project management for a civil engineering firm out of Mississauga. Not flashy work, but honest work, the kind where you show up, you deliver, you go home. He got that from me, or at least I like to think so. His mother, my ex-wife, we separated when he was 16. Amicably enough, she raised him mostly. And she did a fine job. He's a good man. Steady, not the kind to panic. That's why the note shook me. He'd been with Natalie for just over 2 years when he proposed. I met her at Thanksgiving the previous year, up at the cottage near Parry Sound. She came in carrying a bottle of Niagara Peninsula Riesling and a charcuterie board she'd apparently assembled herself, and she kissed me on the cheek like we'd known each other for years. Confident. Almost too confident, but I told myself I was being unfair. My son looked happier than I'd seen him since university. She was a content creator. That's what they call it now. She had somewhere around 400,000 followers on Instagram and another 200,000 on TikTok. And her whole thing was elevated everyday living. Her words, not mine. Beautiful apartment in Liberty Village. Gorgeous photos. Sponsored posts for skincare and linen bedding and small batch olive oil. I'm 63 years old and I don't understand any of it. But she seemed to make a real living from it. So, who was I to judge? What I noticed, though, and I kept this to myself because my son is a grown man, was that she always seemed to be calculating something. Not obviously. She was charming, warm even, but there was a way she'd pause before answering a question, just half a second too long, like she was choosing the most useful version of the truth. I caught it the first night. I told myself it was nerves. I have a habit, maybe a flaw, of not telling people what I'm worth, not out of shame. I'm not embarrassed by it. But because I learned a long time ago that money changes how people look at you. I sold my landscaping company in 2019 for considerably more than most people would guess. I live in a modest house in Burlington. I drive a 4-year-old Subaru. My son knew I'd done well, but he didn't know the specifics. We'd never really talked about numbers. Natalie, it turned out, had done some math of her own. I called my son the morning after I found the note. He picked up on the second ring. "You saw it," he said. "I saw it." "Are you all right?" Long pause. "I don't know, Dad." We agreed to meet for lunch. There's a diner on Brant Street I've been going to for 15 years, the kind of place with laminated menus and coffee that arrives without asking. We took a booth in the back. He looked tired. Not sick tired, but the specific tired of someone who hasn't been sleeping because their brain won't stop. "I found something," he said, wrapping both hands around his mug. "On her phone. I wasn't snooping. I was trying to find a photo she'd taken of us at Niagara Falls, because I wanted to get it printed for the new place. She'd left her phone on the counter, and I opened her camera roll." He stopped, looked out the window. "What did you find?" I said. "Screenshots, dozens of them, from my laptop. Stuff I had saved in Google Drive, old tax documents, the summary from the financial planner I saw 2 years ago, a letter from your accountant that you'd forwarded to me when you were thinking about the cottage renovation." He looked at me. "She'd gone through all of it, Dad. She had screenshots going back 8 months. I put my coffee down. "She knew," he said. "She knew about everything. What I make, what I have in RRSP, and he stopped again. And she knew about you, or at least she'd figured out enough to know it was significant. The diner hummed around us. Someone's kid was coloring in a booth near the window. The cook was whistling something I couldn't identify. Have you confronted her? I asked. No. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I was reading it wrong. But then I started thinking back, and there were things, little things, that I'd dismissed. The way she always asked questions about the cottage, how much it cost to maintain, whether you were thinking of selling. She made it feel like curiosity, like she was just interested in the family. He laughed, short and humorless. She'd asked me twice if I knew what your estate plans looked like. I thought it was weird, but I figured she was just practical. I thought about Thanksgiving, her charcuterie board, the Riesling, the way she'd kissed me on the cheek. Who else knows, I said. Nobody. Just you. Okay, I said. Don't say anything to her yet. Let me think. I want to be honest about something. My first instinct was not a noble one. My first instinct was to simply tell my son to call it off, get out, and let the whole thing dissolve quietly. Protect him and move on. But something nagged at me. Because if Natalie was doing this, she hadn't learned it overnight. People with habits like that don't start with one target, and if she walked away from my son unscathed and unmarried, she'd move on to someone else. Someone maybe without an attentive father. Someone who might not catch it until it was too late, until there was a shared mortgage and joint accounts and no clean exit. I called an old friend of mine, retired OPP. We'd been in the same hockey league for years before his knee gave out. I bought him dinner at a steakhouse in Hamilton and explained the situation. You want to know if she has a pattern, he said. I want to know who she has a pattern, he said. I want to know who she is, I said. It took him 2 weeks. What he came back with was not a criminal record, nothing that clean. But there was a history. A previous engagement in Calgary called off 6 months before the wedding after her then-fiancé discovered she'd been quietly transferring money from a joint account they'd opened to plan the event. The fiancé hadn't pressed charges. He just wanted it over. There was a civil dispute in 2018, settled out of court, involving a business partner who claimed she'd misrepresented her financial position to secure investment in a lifestyle brand that never materialized. None of it would put her in jail, but all of it painted a picture. I sat with that picture for a long time. The rehearsal dinner was at a private room at a restaurant in Oakville. About 40 people, both families. Her parents had driven up from Windsor. Nice enough people, quiet, seemed slightly dazed by their daughter, in the way some parents are when a child moves faster than they can follow. My ex-wife was there, gracious as always. My son's friends, Natalie's friends, half of whom seemed to document everything on their phones for content. Natalie was in her element. She floated around the room with a glass of Prosecco, laughing at the right moments, touching people's arms, saying all the right things. She was wearing a pale green dress that probably cost more than my first car. My son caught my eye from across the room about 40 minutes in. He looked like a man standing at the edge of a diving board, who's not sure the pool has water in it. I crossed the room and put my hand on his shoulder. How are you doing? I said quietly. He leaned in slightly. I can't do it, Dad. I look at her and I keep seeing those screenshots. I keep thinking, everything, every dinner, every trip, every time she said she loved me. Was any of it real? I didn't have an answer for that. I'm not sure there is one. Do you want out? I said. He didn't hesitate. Yes. Then trust me, I said. Enjoy your dinner. I'll handle the rest. He looked at me with an expression I recognized. It was the same look he gave me when he was 9 and had broken a neighbor's window with a baseball and didn't know how to face it. Complete, absolute trust that I would help him through it. It's the most terrifying thing a child can give you, even when they're 34. I'd spent the previous week quietly and methodically preparing, not out of anger. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't operating from rage. I was operating from the same cold, careful focus I used to use when a project was going sideways and I needed to stop the bleeding before it became a crisis. I'd spoken to my accountant. I'd spoken to a lawyer. I'd had a conversation with the restaurant owner, who I'd known for years through the Burlington business community, to let him know there might be a sensitive situation at the end of the evening. He was understanding. I'd also had a conversation with Natalie's mother. That one surprised me, if I'm honest. I'd called her on a Wednesday afternoon, introduced myself properly, told her I needed to speak with her privately, and that it was important. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "This is about the money, isn't it?" Not a question. A statement. She knew. Or at least she suspected. She told me, and I could hear how much it cost her to say it, that Natalie had borrowed money from them twice in the previous 3 years, substantial amounts, and repaid neither. That she'd been engaged once before, that they'd hoped things were different this time. She cried a little. I listened. "I don't want my son hurt," I said. "Neither do I," she said. "Neither do I want more people hurt." It was the closest thing to an ally I'd have in that room. After the dessert plates were cleared, individual butter tarts from a local bakery, a nice touch. "I'll give the caterer that." I stood up. People assumed a toast. There was a polite settling of attention, a few people reaching for their glasses. "I want to say something about the people we love," I started, "and what we owe them." I looked at my son. He was very still. When my son was small, he had a paper route. Every Saturday morning, 5:30, he'd be up before I was, loading that canvas bag, doing his rounds. One December, there was an ice storm overnight, and I found him in the kitchen at 5 a.m. pulling on his boots. I told him nobody would blame him for skipping 1 week. It was dangerous out there. He looked at me and said, "I said I'd do it." That was it. That was enough for him. I paused. That kind of integrity, the kind that keeps a promise even when no one's watching, even when it's hard, that's the thing I'm most proud of in him, and it's the thing I most want to protect. I looked at Natalie then. She was watching me with an expression that was working very hard to stay pleasant, just a slight tightening around the eyes. The professional smile holding, "Which is why," I said, "I need to share something this evening that I believe everyone in this room deserves to know." The temperature shifted. I could feel it, that particular social electricity when a room realizes something unscripted is happening. I kept my voice even. No drama. No theater. I'd promised myself I would state facts and let the facts do the work. I told them what my son had found. I described the screenshots, the tax documents, the financial records, the letter from my accountant, organized in her camera roll over a period of 8 months. I described what my contact had uncovered, the previous engagement in Calgary, the joint accounting, the civil dispute. I described the conversation with her own mother, who had confirmed a pattern she'd been watching with heartbreak for years. Natalie set her Prosecco glass down with a very small, very controlled click. "You're going to take the word of some," she started. "I have documentation," I said. "I'm not asking you to admit anything tonight. I'm not calling the police. I'm not pursuing legal action. I'm simply making sure that my son walks into tomorrow with every piece of information he is entitled to have." I turned to my son. "The decision is entirely yours. It always was. I love you, that's all." I sat down. The room was very quiet for a moment. Natalie's father stared at the tablecloth. Her mother, across the table, had her hands folded and her eyes closed. Natalie herself stood up, smoothed her dress, that pale green dress, and walked out of the room without a word. 3 of her friends followed. The rest of the table stayed exactly where they were. My son sat beside me. He put his hand on my forearm. He didn't say anything for a long time. Eventually he said, "Thank you, Dad." I said, "Don't thank me. You wrote the note." The wedding did not happen. There were logistics, deposits, vendors, a flurry of phone calls over the following days, the venue on the Niagara Escarpment, the photographer from Guelph, the florist. Some of the deposits were non-refundable, which hurt, but it hurt a great deal less than the alternative. Natalie sent my son one message. 3 days later, I don't know exactly what it said. He didn't show me, and I didn't ask. He told me it was mostly defensive. There was no apology in it. That, in its own way, confirmed everything. The question I'd been asked most, by the handful of people who know the full story, is whether I feel any guilt about doing what I did the way I did it, publicly, in a room full of people. I've thought about it seriously. I think it deserved a serious answer. What I keep coming back to is this. A private conversation would have given Natalie the chance to manage it, to work on my son in the days before the wedding, to reframe things, to give explanations that sounded plausible because she is very, very good at finding explanations that sound plausible. A private conversation between the three of us would have been a negotiation she was better equipped to win than either of us. What she couldn't manage was facts, stated plainly in front of witnesses. I'm not saying it was comfortable. It wasn't. Some people at that table were upset with me, at least initially. One of my son's friends texted him the next day to say he thought I'd overstepped. My ex-wife called me and said, very carefully, you couldn't have found another way. And maybe she's right. Maybe there was a cleaner path. Maybe I'm not the right person to judge. But my son is not married to someone who saw him primarily as a financial opportunity. He's not sharing a bank account with someone who photographed his private documents to assess the worth of his family. He's not waking up beside someone who calculated affection like a business projection. He's in Defino right now, actually. Took 2 weeks off, rented a cabin on the water. He called me from there last Sunday. The connection was bad, but I could hear the waves in the background, and his voice sounded like his voice again. Easy, a little dry, with that edge of humor he gets when things are actually okay. How's the Pacific? I said. Cold, he said. Perfect. I asked if he was eating. He laughed. I made bannock last night. From scratch. Watched a video. Was it good? Honestly, not bad. We talked for about 20 minutes about nothing in particular. The leaves, the cottage gutters that still need replacing before winter, a book he'd found at a used bookshop in town. When we hung up, I sat for a while at my kitchen table with my rye and the quiet house around me. There's a kind of grief in it, too. I want to name that honestly, because I think people skip over it in these kinds of stories. It's not uncomplicated. Watching your child's life get dismantled, even when the dismantling is necessary, even when it's right. He had loved her, or believed he did, and that belief was real even if the foundation of it wasn't. That kind of loss doesn't dissolve just because you later find out you were deceived. But grief and regret aren't the same thing. I have the first, I don't have the second. He'll be all right. He was all right before her. And the parts of him that are solid, the paper route kid, the man who shows up, those parts don't come from her. And they didn't leave with her. The envelope is still on my kitchen counter. I don't know why I've kept it. Probably I'll put it away eventually, or throw it out. But for now, it stays. Dad, I don't think I can do this. 7 words. The right 7 words, at the right moment, handed to the right person. Some fathers get to be useful. I'm grateful I got to be one of them. People ask me sometimes if I think I did the right thing. The honest answer is that I'm not entirely sure right is the word I'd use. What I did was necessary. Those aren't always the same thing, and I've lived long enough to know the difference. What I keep returning to is the chain of it, how one decision leads to another, quietly and without announcement, until you're standing in a room of 40 people stating facts into a silence you created yourself. Natalie made a choice when she first picked up my son's laptop, then another when she screenshot the first document, then another and another month after month, building something she thought was invisible. Every one of those choices had weight, even the ones that felt small. That's the thing about this kind of deception. It doesn't arrive fully formed. It accumulates. And when it finally collapses, it collapses all at once, and the person at the center of it always seems genuinely surprised by the size of the fall. I'm not angry at her. I want to say that plainly. What she did was wrong, and it caused real damage to a real person I love. But anger is a heavy thing to carry at 63, and I've set most of mine down. What I feel is closer to a tired kind of clarity. She was good at what she did. She practiced it, and somewhere along the way she convinced herself that the practice was justifiable, that the men she targeted were wealthy enough that it didn't really count as harm. That's the most corrosive kind of self-deception. The kind where you reorganize your ethics around your appetite and call it pragmatism. My son is not a complicated person. That's not a criticism. It's one of the things I admire most about him. He means what he says. He does what he committed to. He handed me 7 words on a piece of paper because he trusted that I would know what to do with them, and that trust is not something I take lightly. It took a particular kind of courage to write that note. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet kind that admits you are overwhelmed and reaches for help anyway. I think we undervalue that. The willingness to say I need someone is not weakness. It's exactly the opposite. What I want, when I think about what this whole thing was actually about, is for him to carry something useful out of it. Not bitterness. Not a permanent wariness that closes him off from the next person who might actually deserve him. But a clearer sense of what his own instincts are worth. He knew something was wrong before he found the screenshots. He'd felt it and dismissed it, because she was charming and his life with her looked good. And it's easier to doubt yourself than to trust an uncomfortable feeling. That's human. But the feeling was right. It was always right. And learning to trust that, to treat your own discomfort as data rather than noise, that's worth more than any lesson I could sit him down and deliver. He called from Tofino last Sunday. The waves in the background, his voice easy. That sound was worth everything. The envelope is still on my kitchen counter. I'll put it away eventually. For now, it stays.